Hey, everybody, welcome back to your Full Crew newscast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and publisher at Autonomy Global. We are discussing drone incursions today, and we have three amazing experts to talk with us about that. So let's go around the horn. We'll start with Major General, United States Air Force retired, James Poss.
Hey, Don, thanks for the invite again. I think this is my second or third time maybe with the full crew, but who's counting? Hey, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm a retired Air Force Major General. My last job was as Deputy Chief of Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance for the Air Force. I was a career intelligence officer, but when I got out of the Air Force, I founded the FAA's Drone Research Center. Assure did that for a few years, and I've been consulting ever since then, mainly with drones.
And fun fact, General Poss is the one that convinced me to start my company, so you guys can all thank him later for that. All right, next up we have Brigadier General, United States Air Force retired, Houston Cantwell.
Hey, Dawn, it's a real pleasure to be with you today. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I think this subject is so relevant and so important. So for myself, I'm a senior resident fellow at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies over in Arlington, Virginia. I've been there for about 2 years, and prior to that, I was a retired brigadier general. Grew up flying F-16s, and at the end of my career, I flew MQ-9s and RQ-4s. So I know drones from the opposite direction, operating them in and around the combat environment.
All right, very good. And last but not least, the kind of the opposite perspective here, we've got Lieutenant Colonel retired Michael Twindell. Am I saying your name right, Twindell? Twining. Okay.
Like the
I can't
teacup.
see my script. I can't see my script. So I'm just making up names.
Okay.
So I've got Lieutenant Colonel Michael Twining, United States Air Force retired, and he's with DroneShield. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm the director for Air Force missions with DroneShield. So I deal with everything Air Force. Recently retired in July, career security forces defender, and most recently I was the defense force commander at Ramstein, where I saw my share of drone incursions there during December of 2024, and shortly after that it was like, oh, it's time to get on the other side of the fence, and I saw DroneShield as an opportunity to make a difference and get effective counter-UAS capability to our airmen. So here I am. Thanks for inviting.
Awesome. Of course. So, I've been saying for a while, it's just a matter of time. I mean, really, if you think about it, in 2015, a drone landed on the White House lawn. And if that wasn't the wake-up call for everybody, I don't know what really should be. But we've seen this incredible escalation overseas of drones in combat and the implications of that to the homeland. So we've got three articles we're going to talk about today, and we're going to pop that first one up. And as we do that, I want to thank today's sponsors, Caresoft, LiveView, and Echodyne. So our first article is up. Very good. Okay, so this one talks about Operation Spiderweb, and this one, if you're not familiar with Operation Spiderweb, it was a real game changer. So this is where the Ukrainians loaded up a whole bunch of different trucks with drones, crossed into Russian territory, launched the drones, and landed on a bunch of very high profile, high dollar price aircraft, and basically blew them up. And it was really unexpected. It was the first operation at that level. And everybody sat back and said, holy shnikes, how did they do that? And can you imagine, what could happen if they did it here? And frankly, we've been talking about this for a while. So I'd like to talk for a minute about Operation Spiderweb. And first, General Poss, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because this was unique, right? This was a first. And, when you think about asymmetric warfare, the big Russian bear versus the Ukrainians that are barely holding on, but yet they've been holding on for years now. And they go in and they do this deep attack that was completely unexpected and did a lot of damage. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it was a masterful intelligence operations. You know, they didn't load the trucks up and ship them. They had them shipped by a Russian shipping firm. So essentially, you know, the Russian version of UPS delivered these containers to an area close to these Russian long-range aviation, their equivalent of Air Combat Command or the old Strategic Air Command. Launched these, and each drone had a human pilot. It also had AI that was trained on a Tu-95 bomber that they had in a museum down in Ukraine. But they used the local cell phone network to report back. They had GPS beacons on board that are used by trucking companies. So if anybody intercepted that, they'd only see fast-moving trucks out there, and came against Russian long-range aviation bombers, Tu-95s and Tu-22s, that were sort of defended. I mean, the Russian version of defense was to stick a bunch of spare tires on the top of them, but at least they had something, and took out 14% of the Russians' long-range aviation force in one fell swoop. I could turn it over to our other panelists on here to discuss the U.S. readiness to do this, but correct me if I'm wrong. We are at, if any, possibly even below zero readiness for this type of thing in the United States. And don't think that something similar couldn't happen. I mean, my former boss, Dave Deptula, I know General Cantwell knows Deptula very well. He gets kicked out of every exercise where he's playing the Red Force because he does something similar. He always ships the Special Operations Forces guys in on container ships, and they always get past customs. So, who knows? Maybe DoorDash is going to deliver, a drone to Barksdale next time that could be used in an attack. It's not would be possible. So I'll turn it over to the other panelists to talk about our defenses.
Yeah, well, let's go to General Cantwell.
Yeah, don't let me pile on there. The Operation Spiderweb was significant in two major ways for me personally. Number one, the beyond line of sight communications. The fact that they were able to be so creative to build that beyond line of sight communications from an operations center in Ukraine all the way deep into Russian territory was groundbreaking. And as has been discussed, that could happen to us in the United States using a Wi-Fi network at Starbucks, using whatever beyond line of sight network that they want to be as creative as they can be to control something in what we call the Internet of Things. That Internet of Things can become a drone with a weapon on it. And it's very convenient for the Internet of Things. Allows us to control our refrigerator, allows us to control our alarm system on our house from long distances, but it also allows nefarious activities, and we're going to have to come to grips with that. Secondly, General Poss mentioned the importance of the intelligence. And so these drones had very small warheads on them. Generally, I got to tell you, flying F-16s, if it wasn't at least 2,000 pounds of explosives, really, what can that really do to the enemy? But they showed that with good intelligence of where to hit a bear bomber with just a few pounds of explosives, they were able to take down those strategic bombers with just a very small payload. And that is also very innovative and very creative. And I think we'll see more of that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, what are your thoughts here?
We've got the same vulnerabilities here that Russia has. We got wide open borders, big gray market for drone parts, tons of soft targets scattered across the country. And I know we're going to talk about Barksdale in a little bit, but I think we need to bring it up right here is, Barksdale showed us that vulnerability. Was that a test? Could be. And what did the enemy learn from that test? They learned a whole lot. Are we ready? 12 to 15 drones flying over Barksdale over a course of a week. And we were largely at their will for the most part. There's more to it than that, but we can't really talk about it on this forum, but there's more to it. But the enemy learned a lot. And so, we've got to get our act together as a nation and defend not only our air bases, but all of our installations, and to include our critical infrastructure, because it's all vulnerable.
Yeah,
Dawn, go ahead, General.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you and I have discussed this ad nauseum, but the basic fundamental problem we got in the United States is that we just don't have the proper counter UAS authorities for our civilian agencies. I mean, and you see a little bit in the Barksdale article where they talk there about coordinating with state and local authorities and all that. Which is great, but as it stands now, all those hundreds of thousands of state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement folks really can't do anything about drones. I mean, they could, arrest the operator or something like that, but that's about it.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in there. I mean, Congress passed the Safer Skies Act in the this past National Defense Authorization Act that gives those authorities. The problem is the training hasn't kept up, nor has the funding, of course. So by the way, everybody, some great articles on that on Autonomy Global. One written by Tom Adams from DroneShield, just from drone responders a couple weeks ago, their national conference. We had the lead FBI guy there talking about, the training facility they set up and what they're doing. But, rulemaking hasn't occurred. They ran one cadre through so far, and that was like in October, frankly, before the, so that's really where we are. But, look, General Poss, we've been talking about this. I remember you're the one that said, and I love this quote, although it is frightening. You said, I'm less worried about the threat coming across the hemisphere than I am about the one that's going to come across our parking lot.
Yeah, and absolutely no offense in the statement to you, Dawn, but we've largely put the lawyers in charge. I mean, the agency that does the most for civilian drone defense is Pam Bondi's, Department of Justice, and Kash Patel, is responsible for most of our drone defenses. And will that ever be a priority for the FBI or even a Department of Homeland Security? I don't think so. They just don't have the culture. They don't have the folks in their chain of command that know anything about air defense up there. It's a longer discussion, but I remain convinced that the solution to this is getting our Guard involved in it. But that's a discussion for another day. I don't think Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are ever going to defend us from home.
Yeah, it's interesting how the Guard's been used lately, but I agree with you. And their normal, kind of steady state Title 32 status, that would make an abundant amount of sense. I hear you there. All right, good stuff. Let's move from Operation Spiderweb to something a little bit more recent, but still overseas, because again, the idea is, what can happen over there can happen over here. So let's talk about Iraq and what just recently happened here, and we'll pop up that second article. Here we go. So this was TWZ reported that there were a bunch of short-range FPV kamikaze drones flown by an Iran-backed militia that appear to have successfully attacked a parked U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter and, importantly, key air defense radar at the Victory Base complex near Baghdad. So this marks the first known successful strike of this kind on a U.S. aircraft. So I'd love to hear, let's go with Michael, because you left Ramstein, you were security forces doing, base defense. What are your thoughts here?
I mean, it's...
Oh, wait a minute. We're going to show, I think we're showing a video here. So
okay.
give it a second.
Yeah.
So there, you can see him go. Whoop, there's the radar, the eyes of the entire airfield. That's an AN MPG-64 radar blown up. So now the base can't see anything. And then they're going to go in and at their leisure take out this medevac helicopter. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, what I found so fascinating was that they didn't just use the drone for the attack, right? They're using the drone itself and other drones for cinematography, like to document this for propaganda purposes, which is like
pretty common for those guys.
Yes,
the job ain't over till the propaganda's done.
100%. So Michael, back over to you.
Yeah, so this very scenario is literally what kept me up at night.
Yeah.
Like absolutely kept me up at night. I was worried because I knew that, you know, at the base that I served at, you know, were we as ready as we could be, you know, and largely no base is, and we had our share of incursions ourselves. But that video is scary, and it has to be a wake up call. Those strikes are a preview. Low cost drones hitting radars. You know, they're targeting, you know, and making us blind. You know, those radars are active, so they show up on the spectrum, whereas passive detection doesn't. So it's a little bit better, but then there's limiting factors there as well. Then they're hitting aircraft. They're getting these, you know, out there, and that's exactly what the future attack on our bases are going to look like. And largely, it's going to be easier here than in a place like Iraq, I would hope. They're a little more fortified, but domestic bases, we've got fewer defenses, and then, like you mentioned earlier, General, our local law enforcement, you know, we're hamstrung. Our laws have not caught up, and we're way behind there. And then the interoperability of, you know, if attack happens, you know, that the comm network between on base, off base, and that joint interoperability, and just the communication and that joint response, we are far away from being even marginally effective in that arena.
Yeah. So go ahead, General Poss.
And it's a pretty massive fight between the services when it comes to all this, and even within the services. So generally the Army is responsible for providing air defense for Air Force airfields. They're woefully underinvested for their own, you know, fixed facilities back here in the States and forward, and even worse for their mobile units. And, you know, figure the odds of the Army putting a significant amount of their resources towards, you know, protecting Air Force bases. You know, the air staff, speaking confidently as a former air staff guy, you know, fight you tooth and nail over putting hard-earned Air Force money into air-based defense if the Army is supposed to do it. And so the only people, and hopefully I'll get an amen here from Mike, the only people that see this as a problem are the security forces folks. Let's be honest, they're not the loudest voice at the table when it comes to the Air Force Council, and it comes to spending money. And it is an expensive proposition to do this. On the other hand, you know, we're always trained in the military to do planning, you know, against the most damaging and the most likely stuff. You know, you want to make sure you got the most damaging thing covered, you know, nuclear warfare, even though it's not likely. Well, this is the most damaging, and I'm going to say the most likely thing that could happen to a lot of our air bases here in the United States, particularly while there's a war going on with Iran. And it's like nobody's moving. Nobody's getting excited. I don't see these requests for information coming out of Materiel Command. I don't see broad air agency announcements, you know, begging industry to come and do this. And I certainly don't see the amount of money that you would need to defend these bases going around, and that boils down to training and all this kind of stuff. It's just not happening. It's like you know, we're in an alternate universe, and we're in the drone world now. Yeah, we need to act accordingly.
Yeah.
Well, thankfully now they've gone. You know, the A3 is actually in charge of counter UAS now, so that part's good. I mean, defenders are still going to be defending. We're still going to have a voice and part of that, being part of the problem, solving it. But you know, the A3 is actually, you know, getting after it, and I think we're moving in the right direction there. But funding certainly has not caught up.
Well, and I'm going to go over to General Cantwell. You know, this was equipment, and yes, significant and important equipment. But you know, just a few years ago, let's not forget, you know, Jordan Tower 22, and you know, it was the first time since World War II where we lost airmen on the ground from an airstrike. And, you know, again, those were drones coming in, and nobody seemed to be identifying them. I mean, what are your thoughts here? This is not really a new problem. You know, I feel like, you know, we've been talking about it and massaging this problem for years, but like, we've known about it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, Don, a couple comments on that. I think, have you all seen the imagery of the AWACS downrange? I think that those attacks in the Central Command on our airfields, taking out some very strategic assets, I think that is going to really light a fire in terms of priority effort when it comes to counter UAS and air-based defense. I will tell you that I'm currently writing a paper on counter UAS. So I've worked a lot with some of the AFCENT folks, and they've done some tremendous work, to be honest. And I've also visited the Joint Counter UAS University, and they actually commended the Air Force in terms of a lot of the efforts they've made to improve air-based defense in terms of getting airmen trained, getting airmen ready before they go down range. And so those were all good things. But we are seeing there are some significant shortfalls. Number one, the resourcing. So how did those drones or those missiles make it all the way into a strategic location and take out very precisely those very important strategic assets? That's a very, very important question. Were they detected? If they were detected, were any actions taken to actually try to stop those threats? So I think after what we've seen the losses in the last few days downrange, I think we're definitely going to see an increased priority and effort from the U.S. Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Saved rounds, anybody on this one?
Well,
go ahead, sir.
if you think Iran was bad, well, wait till you see what China will do, because, this war in Iran is kind of, proven that we were a bit of a paper tiger when it comes to defending against these kind of things. And the Iranian missiles are pretty primitive compared to what the Chinese could do. The Iranians fired a couple missiles at Diego Garcia and a couple at a carrier and missed. Chinese won't miss. So it's something that we got to do. It's something that we got to pay attention to. My apologies for, picking on the security guys, because it's a whole Air Force response. Yeah. I mean, what about our civil engineers? Do we need to go back to revetments? I think industry needs to start working on passive drone defenses. We need to have some kind of drone net or something that you could put over these radars to stop them. You're not going to stop a missile hitting a radar. You'll stop those small drones from doing it with passive defenses. It's one of those things that requires a tremendous response now from a lot of folks, and we're picking on the Air Force, but it's all services as well, to stop an imminent threat.
And thankfully, the Air Force has looked at passive, and that was a recent RFI that they put out for passive defense through the Point Defense Task Force. So they are looking at that, because it at the bottom line, it's layered defense. We can't just look at, there's no one silver bullet. There's not one thing that's get after it. It has to be a layered defense, and even those old school tactics, like I said, revetments, or even aircraft dispersal. What's the parking plan? Simple things that you both learned when you were younger, I'm sure, and those still ring true.
That's a good point.
I think
we first joined the Air Force,
I think the layered defense comment is a thing I would highlight the most. Layered defense when it comes to awareness. So the different types of sensors you've got, both RF, passive, IR, audio, all these different sensors need. So that's layered, and then layered when it comes to the different kinds of effectors you've got to try to stop the threat. But overall, I think the one thing that we're going to wrestle with the most in the Air Force is a change in mindset. What I mean by that is we have not had to generate aircraft under threat for many, many years. The closest we've gotten is we had to practice with our chem bio. So we had different mop postures where you had how imminent the threat was or the attack was, and you would modify your posture depending on how close you thought the attack was going to be. We're going to have to get back to that mindset, because we're going to have to keep generating aircraft. There's going to be a threat out there, and we're going to have to modulate. How do we figure out is it a high threat environment where we take a lot of precautions, or is it a lower threat environment where we can really work through and get those aircraft generated?
Yeah, just to wrap this one up, great point, sir. And actually, you and I sat through the same briefing at the AFA's, I think it was the Airspace Cyber Conference last September, where there was the group out there that of F-16 or 15E. I think were they F-15E pilots?
Bacon Heath. Oh my God. Strike Eagles. F-15E.
The
Don't
Strike
encourage
Eagles,
the
yeah.
F-16 pilot on here.
they they were assisting the Israelis in defeating basically a drone attack, and they were firing missiles off of their jets, and they were definitely under the gun, if you will, having to generate those aircraft sorties, with the constant threat. So there's an article, I did write an article on that. You guys can check that out on Autonomy Global. It was really, really interesting, fighter pilots shooting drones out of the sky with the big aircraft. And it's just like, so talk about asymmetry, right? But, I think that's a great way to kind of segue into our last article for today, which is, all of these things that are happening everywhere else, can they actually happen here in the homeland? And that is the question of the day. And so we're popping up this third article to talk about it. And as we do, I would like to also once again thank our sponsors, LiveView, Carasoft, and Echodyne for sponsoring this and making all of this possible. So, all right. So here we are, and it is 2026. We are in armed conflict with Iran right now, and there's drones buzzing our Barksdale Air Force Base. All right, first of all, General Cantwell, is that a big deal?
Dawn, let me come back at you. You asked, could it happen? My question back to you is, why has it not happened yet?
Yeah.
Right, General
Exactly.
Poss?
Exactly.
I'm so surprised, especially after what happened at Langley Air Force Base just a couple years ago, where we saw this same type of activity that was very difficult to even identify, and then very little progress was made in identifying who were the actors, what were their intentions, even years later. And then here we are, fast forward 2 years, and the same thing's happening at a strategic location where our nuclear enterprise is housed, and we go, what are we doing? And so there are so many challenges that we still have yet to face and overcome when it comes to awareness. As General Poss mentioned earlier about authorities here in the continental United States, and then as well as division of those responsibilities across various organizations across the government at national as well as down at state levels.
Absolutely. So I want to give a little more context here for those that aren't tracking what happened. Mid-March, security forces at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana observed, quote, multiple waves, end quote, of roughly 12 to 15 drones. So swarms we're talking about over sensitive areas, including the flight line. And it triggered a shelter in place order on the base. Confidential briefings cited by ABC's News. Again, we were coming in waves, and they seem to have weird lights that appear designed to test security responses. There seemed to be sophisticated resistance to jamming and non-commercial signal characteristics to these things. So really interesting that we're seeing this here. Look, when was it, about like a year or two ago that we jokingly called it New Jersey Drone Gate?
Yeah.
Okay. Where, if you recall, first of all, I had my 15 minutes of fame on Fox News, and there was a senator on there, and he was saying, oh, it's an Iranian mothership launching drones at New Jersey. And at the time I was thinking, what? But if you said that same thing today, I don't know that anybody would be like, what? They might be like, really? Is that, because it could be possible given the current state of things. So, General Poss, over to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of weirdness going on with this. The fact that there were about a dozen drones and that they all came over in a coordinated manner, that's extremely strange. You would have to have an Operation Spiderweb like C2 structure in order to do that. The fact that they used non-commercial data links is interesting. The fact that Barksdale knew that they were using non-commercial data links is even more interesting. But yeah, you look at it from a bigger picture, and number one, the Iranians definitely have an incentive to attack somewhere here in the United States. It's part of their strategy. We know it is. We know that they've got sleeper cells everywhere. We know that they're good with drones. But let's not forget Vladimir Putin, who's also looking for some revenge for the support the U.S. has given Ukraine, and lost 14% of his long-range aviation out there. You could see him wanting to get involved to help the Iranians do this. If this isn't the mother of all wake-up calls, I don't know, what it is. I hope that, it was a bunch of kids doing it. I doubt that. My next hope is that it was some type of signal to let us know that they're capable of doing that and they wouldn't want to carry through. The danger is, holy cow, if they do the kind of damage that the Ukrainians did to Russia's strategic bomber force, how is President Trump going to respond to losing, no math in public? Barksdale's probably got, 30% of our strategic bomber force in there. Things could get out of hand really quickly.
Yeah. So, Michael, I'd like to hear your thoughts because, there's commentary in this article that Northern Command, or Northcom, fielded what are they calling this kit? Oh, a flyaway kit?
Yep.
Built by Anduril.
One
Sorry,
kit.
I'm laughing. They have one. They have a whole one.
Yep.
And, tell me, what are your thoughts?
Well, first off, these obviously weren't, off-the-shelf DJIs. These were certainly modified. These were likely frequency hopping. These weren't just made in hobbyist drones that were built in by a kid and looking to play. No, this is certainly an enemy state that was looking. They showed that they can shut down a flight line and put our Air Force mission at risk, our people at risk, and ultimately our resources at risk. But the flyaway kit, it's one kit, and the problem is it's reactive. So you've got something that happens, and then we react. It's too late. It's way too late. So is that kit? Yes, Anduril is a competitor, but also a partner. In many instances, because we all have to work together. There's no one single company, but it works. But we need more of it, and that's where the funding and the authorities and all that comes into play. At the bottom line, every installation needs at least RF detection and jamming. Basic, because that's going to get after the majority of the threats. But then you have to add at some point some EOIR. You have to add some radars, and then you have to fuse it all together into one sight picture. And then on top of that, probably nice to have some autonomy, to have these systems work without a human in the loop, because these things happen like that, and you cannot just rely on someone behind a computer to action and get after it and make sense of it. AI is built to help us out as humans, and there is systems out there, including ours, that do that very, very, very well and put everything together and sensor fuse it all together and take the cognitive burden out of the operator, which is where we need to get to, because these threats are only going to get more and more dangerous, more sophisticated, and it's going to continually evolve. And those first, those FPV drones that attacked in Iraq show that, a very low cost drone can take out, a very, very high cost aircraft and then high cost radars. And that's just the tip of the iceberg there. And it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
Well,
I may really quick.
go ahead, please.
In Tower 22, that the breakdown was with the human interface.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard to monitor a screen for hours at a time looking for threats. Mm-hmm. And that's where the breakdown was. So this is a mission set where AI and automation could be useful and really help the effectiveness of the overall defenses.
Yeah. Yeah, having a system that can just automatically detect, track, and then fix and just take care of that threat before an airman even has to do anything about it, that's success. Because then they can actually focus on getting other missions done and not have to worry about looking up and going, okay, is something coming at me? No, whether or not it's at a fixed site installation or it's deployed downrange on an austere base, not having to worry about that threat, or not have to worry about it as much until you get some alerts is a huge differentiator.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you would think defending overseas or on a battle space would be easier in terms of things that could go wrong, right? Like, I mean, the airspace was just shut down near El Paso because allegedly the Army was firing lasers up in the sky, testing some counter UAS stuff. So, I mean, none of this is really simple, especially when you're talking about in cities. And General Paz, I'd like to bring this back to you and your, kind of your comment about, that thing coming across the parking lot, Homeland Security. We've got the 250th birthday of the United States coming up. We've got the FIFA World Cup. 2 years from now, or shortly, down the pike, we've got the Olympics in LA. What, as you're sitting and watching everything that's happening, you're seeing even these flights of swarms over Barksdale Air Force Base that are almost inexplicable. What would you say to those people that are in charge of guarding like 600 site locations for FIFA?
Yeah, I mean, actually, you mentioned the El Paso incident. That's something that bears looking at to show you the current state of defense with both the DoD, DHS, and FAA. I mean, Army loaned DHS Customs and Border Patrol guys a laser to experiment on cartel drones that are smuggling drugs into the country. Big fight between DoD and DHS on one side and the FAA about whether we were going to use this. Never mind that all three of those organizations were told 5 years ago to figure this out. DoD and DHS get frustrated. They shoot a laser off without coordinating it with the FAA. FAA retaliates by shutting down 10 radius circle around El Paso to include the airport for, I think, 3 months, just kind of after spite after they shot it. No, by the way, they shot down a party balloon. They did something similar a few days later. I mean, these guys don't even have basic coordination down that the bedrock that's going to enable us to be able to protect all 600 of those sites. And I'm going to name the Northcom flyaway kit the Mayberry because it's like Barney Fife with that one bullet. We've got one, and allegedly we're going to get a few more in April. I can tell you, we darn sure aren't going to get 600 to protect it. I can tell you that we're not going to get enough to protect the 250th anniversary of the United States. It's going to have every American dignitary known plus a King of England. We're in danger. Our civilian authorities and certainly our legislatures are not acting like it. Even our military folks are I'm not saying, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not seeing the kind of movement that this threat would indicate.
No. I think one of the big comments that I've heard from industry and my military peers is, and I hate to say this, but it's going to take an attack to make some movement and to make a difference and to get that attention. And it pains me to say that, but I really truly believe that's true, that it's going to take something catastrophic before we're woken up. Because in 2018, I think it was the National Defense Strategy when we first started talking that the homeland is no longer a sanctuary, and the Barksdale event just further solidifies that as absolute fact.
Yeah. Well, sobering thoughts all around here. I don't know if there's a way to end on a positive note, but I'd like to go around the horn and get any concluding thoughts here. A message to whoever, whether it's to Congress, whether it's to people in industry and what we need, whether it's to those that protect us and things they need to think about. I'll give you guys a second just to ruminate on that. And as I do, once again, thank you everybody for watching, and to our sponsors, LiveView, Caresoft, and Echodyne, without whom this would not be possible. So let's go ahead and we will start with General Poss.
Yeah, well, I've said it before, I'll say it again, and I'm talking to Congress right now. Put the Guard in charge. Let the Guard use authorities just like they do for counter-drug operations, just like they're using as we speak on the border to help CBP go after illegal immigrants. The only way that we're going to get ourselves out of this in the short term and the long term is to put real professionals in charge, and that's the Army Guard and that's the Air Guard. They're trained and ready to do this. Fund those guys to be able to protect at a minimum our military bases, but at a maximum protect our civilian infrastructure, our oil infrastructure, special events like the Olympics and all that. Allow industry to go out and buy at least surveillance equipment and give them a laundry list of equipment that they could use that, oh, by the way, FAA, DHS and DOD were told to do 5 years ago that they still haven't done. You like to say we're facing a Pearl Harbor moment, but I sure hope we could turn it into our Battle of Britain moment. And if you look at the Battle of Britain versus Pearl Harbor, the Brits started planning for the Battle of Britain back in 1916. They invented the Air Force, they invented the radar, they invented the command and control system that we still use for air defense, they invented the Spitfire. Kicked the bejeebus out of the Germans. They gave every bit of that technology to the Americans. It was in place, Pearl Harbor, and we didn't use it. Let's be the Brits this time instead of Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, who was the B-17 pilot who was hung over, and P-40 pilot who was hung over and decided not to launch against the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. We're better than that. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, General Cantwell.
Great points, General Poss. Hey, Dawn, thanks for the opportunity to provide a few remarks and insights here. Number one, I'll just say, JIATA 401, they've got their hands full, but Department of War cannot think that they're going to fix it all. So JIATA 401, they've got to synchronize efforts, but really it's the services that have to take the lead on each one of these. And I hope that each service will take these threats for what they are, which are an imminent and very important threat. And they need to resource and come up with money, because I can think of nothing else that's a higher priority. They need to prioritize this. They need to resource for it, start exercising with it, and make sure that all of their installations have a modicum of protection, both overseas as well as domestically. And it starts with the services. Thanks, Dawn.
All right, that's awesome. And last but certainly not least, Michael.
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to your sponsor, Echodyne. We love Echodyne. They're great partners of ours. Their radars are awesome, especially the EchoShield. So yeah, they're awesome. But JIATA 401, General, I agree. It's not going to be the save all, but they are certainly a night and day difference from what the JCO was. So I think we are absolutely moving in the right direction. And
who are those guys?
JIATA 401.
Yeah, who are they? What do they do?
Oh, they're the Joint Interagency Task Force that's charged with counter UAS for the services. So they're essentially bringing everything together within the Department of War and the Department of Homeland Security. From the industry perspective, I'm seeing a lot of good movement, and I think the process is working for JIATA 401. Is as far as the marketplace, the testing, and given guidance, but also the procurement arm as well. Those things are actioning, and where our warfighters need it, they are actioning quickly. And I'm encouraged by that, not only just as someone in industry, but just as an airman as well, and seeing that we're actually going to get stuff into airmen's hands, soldiers' hands, Marines' hands, through that process where it's needed most. But then from an industry perspective, everybody in industry needs to work together. We can't be working in SOAP by, looking at, okay, well, we've got the best things. well, you may have some good stuff, but it's going to take all of us working together in concert to get after this mission. One, the manufacturing piece, but two, just the interoperability and having things that can, if DroneShield equipment can work with Anduril or with an SAIC, or pick a company, Parsons, whoever. We need to be able to work together and play nice with each other in order to get to get the capability into the hands of our warfighters, our airmen, our soldiers, Marines, our sailors, because one company can't do it. We've all got to do it together.
All right, excellent thoughts. And I'll just close with, again, thanking everybody. Thank all three of you for your thoughts and your time, just invaluable for the rest of us. And, let's just hope that, and hope is not a plan, of course, we all know this, that people are listening and these things will move forward. I'd hate to be, the one sitting there, or any one of really the four of us, where we're looking back and we say, we told you so.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not be in that position. So we'll keep track of these things as other news breaks. We will of course cover it, but really appreciate you guys. And that's all she wrote for this special edition of the Full Crew Drone Incursion.